I have written another article for New Eastern Outlook. This one is titled Latest Lebanon Pager Terrorist Attack, Predictable, Preventable. And this is in regards to this egregious, horrific, unjustifiable terrorist attack carried out almost certainly by Israel, but again, almost certainly with US and European support, where they rigged thousands and thousands, I'm talking about 5,000 pagers, radios, other kinds of electronic devices. They either did this at the factory floor or intercepted these devices in transit. They rigged them with explosives, and then they were distributed out across Lebanon. Now, they say this was targeting Hezbollah, but you have to remember, Hezbollah is a large organization. It is not just a militant organization. It is also a political organization. They administer parts of Lebanon. That means there's medical workers, relief organizations, people who collect the trash. So when you're targeting all of these people, that's who you're killing, not just militants. So an inexcusable, but also indiscriminate terrorist attack. There were children who saw the pagers going off. They picked them up to bring them to their fathers, and they were blown up and killed. Indiscriminate. A war crime under any definition of war crime. Let me read through this article. As always, I'm going to include additional information when and if necessary. I want to specifically talk about exactly why I say this was predictable and preventable. It wasn't that there was a lapse of security. There was no security at all. So let me just read through this article. Western media is calling an indiscriminate Israeli terrorist attack across Lebanon that has killed several, including at least one child that has now increased since I wrote this, and injured thousands. They're calling it unprecedented and sophisticated, yet nothing about the attack, which reportedly involved 5,000 pagers rigged with remotely detonated explosives before distribution, was unpredictable or unpreventable. Reuters, in its article, this article here, Israel planted explosives in Hezbollah's Taiwan-made pagers, say sources. This was September 20th, 2024. The operation was an unprecedented Hezbollah security breach that saw thousands of pagers detonate across Lebanon, killing 9 people and wounding nearly 3,000 others, including the group's fighters and Iran's envoy to Beirut. So including fighters, but also including people who are not fighters. Again, a terrorist attack, a war crime. The Lebanese security source said the pagers were from Taiwan-based Gold Apollo, but the company said it did not manufacture the devices, but were made by a European firm with the right to use its brand. And as other people have pointed out, that is beyond suspicious. Europe doesn't manufacture pagers licensed to them by some obscure company in Taiwan. So it was almost certainly a shell company that almost certainly could not exist without US, European support, legal, covert support of all kinds. Almost certainly a joint effort to do this. Reuters reported up to 3 grams of explosives were hidden inside a batch of new pagers exploding when a coded message sent to them simultaneously activating the explosives. Reuters reports that the pagers originated from a Taiwan-based manufacturer who in turn claims devices were assembled in Europe with their permission to use their brand. The pagers purchased by and for distribution to Hezbollah's security, administrative, medical, and relief and adjacent networks spent the entirety of their time from manufacturing to shipment in potential enemy hands before arriving in Lebanon, exposing them to, at a minimum, well-documented security breaches the US and its proxies have implemented for well over a decade. This time, the devices were transformed into remotely detonated explosives with enough energy to seriously maim or kill those holding the devices, or maim and kill those located nearby, again, including children. The attack was made possible not by a lapse in security or because the threat was until now inconceivable, but only by a complete lack of relevant national and operational security policy and procedures involving the procurement of technology for official and or domestic use versus the well-understood dangers of sourcing technology from abroad. So let's talk about this well-documented history of turning tech into ticking time bombs, figuratively speaking, and now literally speaking. American citizen and former U.S. National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden, I hope people remember him, a very brave man, was among the first to suspect the pager attack was not the result of an Israeli hack compromising the batteries of the devices, but was instead the result of the devices being tampered with to include explosives either at the factory or at a shipping facility. In a September 18th, 2024 post, this one right here, on the social media network X, Snowden included photos from 2013, all the way back in 2013, of NSA teams opening packages and tampering with IT devices during transit. And this is what he said. He says, "I keep thinking about the top secret photo from the revelations of mass surveillance back in 2013, revealing how the NSA poisoned commercial shipments in transit, often at airports, to spy on the ultimate recipients. 10 years later, and shipment security never improved." Nobody takes this seriously. And because no one took it seriously, they left their gates completely opened and anyone could walk through in any manner of their choosing. In a 2015 article, this article right here, this was my pen name at the time, Olsen Gunner. I had at least three pen names. Olsen Gunner was the pen name I used for technology related topics. IT independence is national security. And I wrote all about how electronic devices were being compromised on the factory floor and in shipment, and how nations needed to secure their supply lines. They either had to make this technology themselves, or they had to make sure that it was not running through the hands of potential enemies. And I even said right here, such concerns have already prompted Russia to begin requiring computers used by the government sector to include Russian-made processors, because even the processors were being hacked. With hard drives now potentially compromised, the NSA has once again given the world a reason to boycott US tech giants and those within America's sphere of influence, which would include Taiwan and all of Europe, I would say, and replace them with locally produced alternatives manufactured under tighter security controls. This was all the way back in 2015. This was in regards to things that were happening since at least 2013. If you are involved in operational security for an organization like Hezbollah or a national government like Lebanon's, how are you not taking this seriously? How are you leaving this gap open in your security? The 2015 article, this author warned about the national security implications of depending on other nations for information technology. The article cited, so I was citing other articles at the time, Popular Science mentioning a process called interdiction, which it described as a process in which they intercept mailed goods and replace them with infected versions. Also cited was a 2013 Australian Financial Review article titled Intel Chips Processors Could Let US Spies Inside Expert, describing a multitude of cybersecurity breaches and the likelihood that the US NSA was likely embedding backdoors inside chips produced by Intel and AMD, giving them the possibility to access and control machines. As far back as 2013, the risk of IT hardware manufactured abroad being compromised either in the factory or in transit was so high, nations like Russia and China began producing their own processors, operating systems, computers, and other essential hardware for official work, or created workflows that excluded the use of such hardware altogether. I saw, so I don't know if it's true or not, that the Kremlin was bringing back electronic typewriters, for example. For well over a decade, IT hardware procured from abroad represented metaphorical ticking time bombs compromising information security. Today, because of a lack of seriousness in addressing this long-standing security flaw, IT hardware has now been transformed into literal bombs. Today, the dangers of these threats are not only more deeply understood, they have grown considerably. Even across Lebanon, modern smartphones were so regularly compromised by Israeli intelligence agencies, Hezbollah's leadership encouraged members to discard them. So the same Reuters report that I cited earlier, they also said this. In a televised speech on February 13th, the group's Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah sternly warned supporters that their phones were more dangerous than Israeli spies, saying they should break, bury, or lock them in an iron box. Instead, the group opted to distribute pagers to Hezbollah members across the group's various branches, from fighters to medics working in its relief services. While the general danger compromised IT hardware represented was understood, effective measures to protect against it were not implemented. Discarding smartphones compromised precisely because the entirety of their hardware and software is produced abroad, where the US regularly compromises both, often in cooperation with industry partners, and replacing them with pagers likewise manufactured by industry in league with or under the influence of the US and its proxies simply provided a greater opportunity to compromise Lebanon's national security and Hezbollah's operational security. IT hardware and the information space it enables constitutes an additional domain of national security as important to protect for a nation as its land borders, airspace, and shores. I have warned about this for years now. Just as Hezbollah, Iran, Russia, or China wouldn't purchase crucial defense articles from the United States or its proxies, knowing such articles could be tampered with, sabotaged, or otherwise compromised, nations and organizations must avoid purchasing the means of maintaining, using, and protecting their information space from enemies. So that includes things that seem like benign consumer goods, but are actually key to maintaining and protecting this new domain of national security, information space. Hezbollah, Lebanon's government and military, and the governments, military, and essential institutions and organizations across the emerging multipolar world must as urgently establish self-sufficiency in terms of information technology as they have in other areas of national security. Could you imagine Iran buying air defense systems from the United States? It wouldn't even make sense. The US would probably sell them air defense systems just so they could rig them and make sure they don't work when Iran has to use them. But they would never even dream of even thinking about acquiring US air defense systems to use because they know they would be compromised. Yet they don't seem to understand that cell phones, smartphones, pagers, radios, anything that is manufactured along a supply chain the US has access to and could compromise, that could also likewise be used against them. They just didn't seem to understand that. Manufacturing of computers, their individual components, including processors, smartphones, radios, pagers, and all other devices, as well as software and online platforms, must be designed, manufactured, and/or coded by a nation itself or a trusted ally. The design, manufacturing, and coding process for hardware and software used across the information domain must be overseen by experts working within the governments, organizations, and institutions acquiring this information technology. Had Hezbollah prioritized IT hardware and software as central to their organizational security and Lebanon's national security, they would have created an entire organization dedicated to acquiring, using, and ensuring the security of this technology. Their experts would have overseen the production of the pagers they sought to replace their smartphones with. They would have overseen their transportation to end users, and the possibility of embedding 5,000 pagers with explosive devices would have been inconceivable. In other words, purchasing IT hardware or software should be approached not as acquiring benign consumer goods, but as central to national and operational security, and under the assumption that if an opportunity is provided to compromise this essential technology, potential enemies will exploit it, as they have repeatedly done. Now, how these goods are designed, manufactured, and shipped, and by whom, is of central importance. If any part of the supply chain puts this technology into the hands of a potential enemy, it should be assumed that purchased devices or software have been compromised. While nations like Russia and China appear to be far ahead of most in terms of securing their information domain, as well as the hardware and software that constitutes it, many allies and potential allies have not. Antiquated attitudes toward information space, seeing it as peripheral to national security rather than a domain of national security, has created a deep culture of complacency, ignorance, and even incompetence. The US, Israel, and potentially the Taiwan-based manufacturer of the pagers or their European partners succeeded in carrying out this malicious, indiscriminate terrorist attack across Lebanon, not because of any particular prowess on their part, And not even because of a temporary lapse of security on Lebanon's part, but because Lebanon's information domain remains virtually unprotected, with apparently no understanding that it even should be protected, let alone any effective strategy to do so. The attack was preventable. Future attacks are preventable. Just as Russia and China conduct more traditional forums and exercises involving the traditional domains of national defense, land, air, and sea, forums and exercises focused on defending the information domain are essential. Impressing upon nations, governments, administrations, organizations, and institutions, and even individuals of the importance of information technology sovereignty, of either making this technology themselves or acquiring it from close allies, overseeing themselves in a transparent process from factory floor to transit to distribution, eliminates the open and unguarded gate the US and its proxies exploited in this most recent attack. Defending national security domains is already a daunting task when done properly. Information space is perhaps the most complicated and least understood of these domains. Again, some nations don't even see it as a national security domain. But in many cases, political and military leadership fail to understand information is a national security domain to begin with. Changing this attitude and expanding existing joint defense cooperation into information space is the first step toward ensuring this strategy, at a minimum, is not as easy to repeat or as large scale if it is attempted again. And I may seem like I'm being very hard on those whose responsibility was to protect against threats like this, but again, it was entirely predictable. When I saw these pagers exploding just like Edward Snowden, I work on electronics, I'm familiar with battery fires. They did not look like battery fires. And the first thing that came to mind was that this is the US and their proxies doing what they've been doing for a decade now, intercepting shipments of hardware and compromising it. This time they actually, instead of just putting the means of surveilling and recording information off the device or using it as a homing beacon, they actually turned it into a bomb. And this is something that should not even have been possible in the first place. Again, technology sovereignty, including the design, coding, manufacturing, and distribution of information technology, should be a top national security priority. This should never be able to happen again, although I almost guarantee you nations will continue remaining complacent to this. How many times have I talked about in previous videos about nations the US is clearly trying to undermine and destabilize and overthrow politically, whose entire information space is dominated by US-based social media platforms? You're allowing the US to control an entire national security domain. You have absolutely no control or influence over your own national security domain. And they have used this to overthrow entire countries, to poison the population against its own best interests, and to use the population as a weapon to destabilize and destroy the country itself. They have done it over and over again. They had done it several times before the Arab Spring. They did it during the Arab Spring on a regional level, and they have done it continuously since then. And it's only possible because nations do not take information space seriously as a national security domain. So I'm hoping that these people who were killed and maimed didn't suffer and die in vain. I hope that nations, organizations, individuals around the world learn from this and adapt and overcome accordingly. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. Check the video description for all the links that I referenced in this video, including the link to the article that I read. In the video description, there are also ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation or donations month to month, or if you have no resources to spare at all and you're just helping share my work with others, that is all greatly appreciated. That is what makes this work possible, so thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.